Hey guys, stick around. I'm about to interview Keisha Russell with her brand new book, Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom while there is still time. Keisha has been an attorney with First Liberty Institute. As you know, Kelly Shackelford's on our National Advisory Board, and First Liberty is one of our most important partners as we fight for Christians to pray, vote, and engage and get involved for the nation. So stick around. You don't want to miss this conversation with Keisha, a former teacher who's going to teach you everything First Amendment. Here at Christians Engage, we are on a quest to see every American Christian take stewardship of their life, their nation, and this generation. Can you imagine a world where every Christian in this country did three simple things? Pray, vote, and engage. And what if we did those ongoing? It would totally shift our nation. That's what we're doing here at Christians Engaged. Over the last 5 years, we've built a standing army of Christians that are saying, I want to pray, vote, and engage ongoing and be leaders in my community. We're just getting started, folks. Here at Conversations with Christians Engaged, join us every week as we take you in depth in interviews with government officials, ministry leaders, subject leader experts, to awaken and empower you to do those three things ongoing. I'm Bunni Pounds. I'm the president and founder of Christians Engaged. I spent 16 years in political consulting working for members of Congress and other candidates before starting this ministry. And my co-host, Ben Quine, our biblical worldview expert and our vice president. Come on a journey with us every week. We're here to help you pray, vote, and engage. Well, Keisha, I am so excited to be with you. I have your new book. I bought it. Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom Where There Is Still Time. I'm so excited. We've known each other for a while. You were featured on our On-Ramp to Civic Engagement class that many people have gone through now, working with First Liberty Institute. So I want to start at the beginning because you have an amazing story of how you were a middle school teacher and then got called into law and now constitutional law and helping Christians and churches around the nation. So tell me, how in the world did that happen?
Yeah, so I was actually teaching elementary, 4th and 5th grade, special education. And I did that for a couple of years in Atlanta Public Schools. And I just was really disheartened at the kind of education a lot of students are receiving. I received a pretty strong education. I grew up in South Florida, went to a couple charter and magnet schools. And I just thought it was incredible, the fact that some of these students couldn't read and they were in 4th and 5th grade. I just thought that was crazy. And so that's when I just became more of an advocate for my students and for education in general. And then I felt that the Lord called me to be a broader advocate. And I felt very called to go to law school. So ultimately, I ended up at Emory University, which has a Center for the Study of Law and Religion within the law school.
Wow.
And that's where I was introduced to this phenomenal area of law called religious liberty. I was working with a rabbi there, and his name was Mark Goldfeder, brilliant guy, and learned a lot from him. We did a lot of work impacting Israel and Jewish people, and at the time, he worked for Jay Sekulow, for ACLJ.
Yep.
And so I did a lot of work for them. And then after I left Emory, I ended up at First Liberty as an intern. And then they hired me after I passed the bar exam. So that was sort of my journey there.
Well, and a lot of people know through Christians Engaged that First Liberty is one of my favorite ministries. It's one I support personally, but they've been one of our key partners since the beginning of Christians Engaged, because I felt like it was very important, Keisha, as you know, to share, make sure that people have a foundation on the First Amendment. I mean, this is the beginning of all of our freedoms. If we don't get this right, we're in trouble. But also to break off fear on Christian pastors and ministers, but also Christians in general. Sometimes we get in fear that, we can't do certain things or something's going to happen to us. We can't share the gospel in certain places. We can't take Jesus in our workplaces. We can't talk about politics in church. There's a lot of misconceptions.
Right.
What have you seen in your work that you're like, trying to break fear off of people in that realm?
Yeah, so, I have a lot of clients who have been extremely brave to step out in faith and to challenge the government. I mean, that's a hard thing to do, even when you're a small Christian organization like you guys, or you're an individual. One of my clients right now, Marisol Castro, she is being disciplined. She's on paid administrative leave because she had a small crucifix in her personal workspace, and they told her she needed to take it down. These
Wow.
people don't understand the law, right?
No.
Even after the Coach Kennedy case, there's still, this type of persecution is still taking place. And so we're representing her. We were forced to sue because the school district wouldn't respond to our demand letter in a way that restored her rights. And so we had to move forward. But what I'm seeing is that there are a lot of people who don't know that they have this right,
Yeah.
that they don't know that the government is supposed to honor your religious liberty. They're supposed to protect it as well as your freedom of speech. And I think people use this sort of term separation of church and state, and you and I know that's not in the Constitution, and it definitely doesn't mean that we banish religion from public life. You do that, and you have to eliminate it from education and all sorts of places that it really needs to be there.
For sure.
Right. So one of the things I wanted to do was address those things in my book and really explain to Christians, here's how the law works, and you have the truth. The Bible says the righteous are as bold as a lion.
Yes.
Right. And so I think the more information you have about your rights and the more information you have about the gospel, the more confident you'll be.
So give everybody a beginning overview of why you wrote the book. Uncommon Courage is the name, guys. You can get it on Amazon or wherever you get your books. But why sit down? Because this is a heavy lift. I've wrote a book. It is not easy. How long did it take you to write? And what was your main motivation to get it out?
It took me about a year and a half because I was still litigating full time, writing the book. But my main motivation was, my inspiration was our clients at First Liberty, just seeing, what they go through and what the kind of courage that they demonstrate to advance their faith. But the other thing was talking to Christians about our cases at First Liberty and realizing that many of these Christians were on the side of the government. Like, they didn't really understand the Constitution, the law.
Wow.
And I thought that was a huge detriment to the church. And so we have a lot of people who are scared and fearful because they're scared of the government. But the Constitution is a contract between the government and the people.
Yep.
And the Constitution tells the government what they can and cannot do. And unless you know that, the government can run over you, right? And so my goal was really to educate Christians and make sure that they understand the limits there, the power limits of the government. And also, one of the other things is a lot of people don't understand how intertwined Christianity is in our history,
True.
right? So we know the founding fathers really took to heart this warning in the Bible about what happens when you give leaders too much power, right? And
Yep.
so they responded to that by developing the separation of powers. Right? That's why we have that principle. It is a biblical principle. That's why we do it.
Yes.
And people don't understand that. That's the foundation for our government. And so we can't get away from it, right? They're inextricably linked, Christianity and our Constitution. And so I thought that was important for Christians to know, to understand, and then to be able to proclaim.
We talk a lot within Christians Engaged that we're thankful we don't live in Iran or North Korea or Venezuela. I just did an interview with the president of Iran Alive, where they're seeing, revival within the Iranian church, right? And it brings it all back to perspective that, wow, what the founders have given us in this nation is incredible. Right? And rare. And what First Liberty, what you guys do is defend everybody's right to their faith. That's really critical. We're not just defending Christians. We're defending everybody to the right to their own beliefs. But then, just to make sure that, government, local government, state government, federal government is not encroaching on those liberties. As you know, we had a great case with First Liberty back in 2001 where the IRS sent me a letter denying our tax exempt status,
right?
Because Bible teachings are typically affiliated with the Republican Party and candidates, according to the Internal Revenue Service. And thank you guys for taking our case pro bono and helping us beat back the IRS. But why do we need to be vigilant to protect our religious liberties? Because we don't want to turn into Venezuela or Iran or Cuba. Why is that important?
Well, I mean, your story illustrates it, right? Because what would happen if the IRS started denying tax exempt status to people who teach
The
the
Bible.
Bible?
Exactly.
What would that mean?
That would like affect every church and ministry in the country.
Every single one,
Yeah.
right? So that's why it's important. It's
Yeah.
because you never know how your case is going to impact somebody else, how it's going to impact a ministry, how it's going to impact the gospel, the kingdom of God, ultimately. And the other thing is, if we don't fight for these freedoms, we will lose them. It's very difficult to keep our free speech, especially, and you see the climate that we've been in the last, say, decade, where the culture has become so skewed to the left that if you say anything biblical, you were canceled and you maybe even lost your job. I mean, we represented a flight attendant who lost her job
Yes.
for defending the gospel
Yep.
on Facebook. Her private free speech. And so this is still happening. We defended Navy SEALs who wouldn't take the COVID vaccine because of their religious beliefs and won that case. And that impacted every service member.
Yeah, for sure.
Ultimately.
Yes.
And so that's why it's important, because it has an impact. There's a wave that happens when you defend yourself, and a lot of other people are impacted by it. And again, if we don't hold the government accountable, they'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing our freedoms back. You know that there are plenty of countries, including China, that said they do have free speech for their citizens. They say they do it. Do they? No, they don't. And so what good are these documents if we don't force the government to adhere to them?
Yeah. So, number one, what does tyranny look like? And what are the laws on our books that protect us as Americans from tyranny and actually foster liberty? Because I don't think we have a clear understanding sometimes of what that is.
Yeah, you hear a lot of people throw around these terms, and it's pretty clear that they don't really understand what they mean, right? So obviously, a lot of people talk about Hitler and what a tyrant he was, but why was he a tyrant? Well, because he wanted to be the ultimate power, even in your life, even over your God, right?
Yeah.
So you had to obey him over God. You couldn't criticize him, right? There was no free speech in Nazi Germany, contrary to a recent interview I heard about the fact that they thought toxic free speech was the cause of Nazi Germany. I don't know if you heard this, but it was quite ridiculous.
Wow.
But there was no free speech there. There was no freedom of religion. The Nazis really infiltrated the churches and made sure their message was the right message. Mein Kampf was on the altars of some of the churches, no Bible. So these are the things you'll see. Typically, the people who are pushing back against free speech and against being critical of the government, those are the people you need to be weary of. Yeah, because those are the ones who are trying to usurp your constitutional rights and your God-given rights, right? These are constitutional rights because they're your God-given rights. Your ability to free speech, your ability to worship who you want to. Those are things that God has given us,
Yes.
and the government should never take away. And that's what the power of the First Amendment and the Constitution.
We're going to pause this interview for just a second because I want to play a few clips from Keisha's performance on our On-Ramp to Civic Engagement seminar. This class is critical for every Christian to get involved in praying, voting, and engaging. And she was amazing when we recorded this a couple years ago. So I want you to catch a couple thoughts that she has, and then we'll come back to this interview.
The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In that one statement, you'll see two different provisions. One is that the government cannot establish religion, and the other is that it cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion. So we're going to talk about those because there is a constant tension going on in the law right now between those two clauses and a really huge misunderstanding about what those clauses mean. So first, the establishment of religion. Now, originally and historically, that clause was really just to mean that the government cannot establish a church, right? And so that government cannot establish a church and say, you have to come to this church and pay tithes to the church, and this is the church where you worship, okay? That's what the Establishment Clause was about. Over time, the Establishment Clause has sort of Frankensteined into meaning that the government cannot tolerate any religion at all. Now, what that really means is that analysis or interpretation of the Establishment Clause ends up impacting the Free Exercise Clause, which is the next one I'll talk about, okay? So the free exercise really just means the government cannot prohibit you from exercising your religion. Now, you'll hear in mainstream media that the Free Exercise Clause really just defends your right to believe. But you'll see very clearly that that word says exercise, meaning act. It doesn't just mean what's going on in your head, okay? You are allowed to be outward and demonstrative in your exercise of religion. That's what it means. And so when you have an Establishment Clause that's sort of been Frankenstein, as I mentioned before, and you have a Free Exercise Clause that then ends up getting squelched, you'll see that what we have in the culture right now is a really big misunderstanding about what these clauses mean and what the law really means. And ultimately, what America is really all about, right? Because we know ultimately that part of the reason why our country was established is to allow the free exercise of religion. So I'm going to go through a couple of cases that are going to give you an understanding about what this means. So number one, the Supreme Court has really recognized that there is a play in the joints between the Free Exercise Clause and the Establishment Clause. What does a play in the joints mean? It means that these two clauses intersect, right? And you have to figure out how to maneuver and use both of them in order to get to the most just position. So I'm going to tell you about one case called the American Legion versus the American Humanist Association. That was one of First Liberty's very first wins at the Supreme Court of the United States. And that case is about this amazing World War I memorial called the Bladensburg Memorial. It's in Maryland, erected in the early 1900s. What I think is one of the most important things about this memorial, one of the most amazing things, is that both the black and white soldiers are listed on that memorial without distinction during a time when we know there was much distinction in that area of our culture. And so that memorial was erected at the time. It was on private land. And over time, this evil thing called eminent domain, which I won't go into now because that's not why we're here. But eminent domain, as a result, the memorial ended up being on public land, all right? It belongs to the state now. And so they erected this highway right around the memorial because they didn't want to tear it down. And a group of atheists sued the state and said it was a violation of the Establishment Clause for them to allow this memorial to stand and certainly to continue to maintain it. And so First Liberty represented the American Legion and decided that we were going to defend this memorial. Now, as I mentioned to you, the sort of Frankenstein version of the Establishment Clause says that not only is the government not allowed to tolerate religious exercise, but it's not allowed to tolerate anything religious on public land at all. So that means it must get rid of anything that looks religious or resembles religion, which is wrong. And so the way this kind of emerges through this case called Lemon versus Kurtzman. Now, Lemon is a really important case because Lemon is the reason why the Establishment Clause is the way it is right now. And Lemon said that it is against the law for the government to endorse religion. And that really just means to, in any way, tolerate it. And so depending upon the judge that you had, that was going to determine whether you won or lost the case. And in American Legion, one of the things we asked the Supreme Court to do was to get rid of that Lemon test. That's what it became known as in the law. And a lot of people hated this test. I mean, Scalia wrote about it and said it was like this ghoul that keeps stalking law. And you can't get rid of it, and no one can kill this thing, right? And so we asked the Supreme Court, not only do we want you to preserve the Bladensburg World War I memorial, because it is not an establishment of religion in the original meaning of the Establishment Clause, but we also want you to get rid of this Lemon test because it's unworkable, it's too subjective, and it's resulting in hostility to religion, which is really a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. And so we won that case. And we didn't completely get rid of Lemon, although we had quite a few justices that wanted to get rid of it. And by that point, the Supreme Court hadn't used it in so long that it pretty much became unworkable, right? And so one of the only places where you'll find the Lemon Test being used sometimes is in the school context. And I'll get to that in just a second. So another case that really helps you sort of see where all this is going, right, is a case called Carson versus Macon. And that case was argued in December of 2021, and it will be decided this term. Now, Carson versus Macon is about a group of parents in Maine that want to use the state tuition vouchers, which the state allows parents to use for private schools, but the state prohibits using those vouchers for religious schools. Now, there was a case that was decided a couple years ago called Espinoza, and that case says the state doesn't have to pay for private schools, but if it does, it cannot discriminate against religious schools. Okay? And so what we're looking at now in Carson versus Macon is sort of extending that idea to these tuition vouchers and understanding that just because the government treats religion neutrally, that is not a violation of the Establishment Clause. In fact, the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause requires the government to treat religion just like it would treat any other secular activity. And so that's what we're fighting for in Carson versus Macon, because the state is arguing it's a violation of the Establishment Clause for us to give money to these religious schools. Well, it's actually a violation of the Establishment Clause for you not to give this money to the religious schools when you're giving it to other private schools, right? So we're expecting a decision in that case at least before June, really. It'll be decided this term. Now, First Liberty is such a tiny organization, and it really blows my mind the kind of impactful cases that we get to fight. And our fearless leader, Kelly Shackelford, whom I'm assuming many of you have heard speak before, very humble, incredible, inspiring leader. And he'll tell you that there was a point in time when we just wanted to have, one Supreme Court case at some point, right? And this term, we're all the way up to the place where we have 2 Supreme Court cases in one term. And for those of you who don't know, the Supreme Court takes about 1% of the cases that are presented to it. And for us to get 2 in a term is just miraculous and very divine. Now, the second case, so what I'm going to tell you about, and I'm sure is one that you guys have heard about because it was all over the news, which is really exciting. So the second case is about Coach Kennedy. Well, the second case this term, the third case I'm telling you about. All right, so Coach Joseph Kennedy. How many of you guys have heard about Coach Kennedy? If you haven't, you've been sleeping under a rock, because I'm telling you, it's all over the news. ESPN, CNN, Fox News, everywhere. I mean, New York Times covered it. A lot of mainstream media covered this case. And I'll tell you that in some ways, the mainstream media really did our client and his testimony a lot of justice. Of course, there's some of the talking points about whether this is an establishment of religion, and also the idea that people should be free from religion, which is actually not a thing. But they really did tell his story pretty well. So I would encourage you to go and look at all the articles and the stories about Coach Kennedy, because they're really incredible. So Coach Kennedy was a high school football coach in Washington State. And he was inspired by the movie Facing the Giants. Do you guys remember that movie? Of course you do, because you're Christians and we've all seen it. And it's like amazing and heartwarming, makes you cry at the end, right? Well, apparently it had that same impact on Coach Kennedy, because he decided to, at the end of every game, go out on that 50-yard line and pray for the opportunity to coach those boys. All right, and so this was after the game when people are singing the fight song and doing whatever. So Coach Kennedy ends up praying, and eventually he ends up getting fired for praying in front of the students. Now, there's some talk about how when he first started praying, there were some students who would, not just students on his team, but other teams and other people who would join because they saw him praying and thought it was cool and they wanted to join. But Coach Kennedy never asked anyone to do that, and everyone did it of their own volition. Initially, Kennedy thought that was fine. The school asked him to stop doing that. And so he just prayed by himself. And then the school decided, well, we don't want that either because people can still see you. And we just don't think anyone should see you praying. God forbid someone should see another person praying, right? So we took Coach Kennedy's case, and we've been fighting it for 7 years. And this past Monday, the Supreme Court heard that case, and we got to hear all of the 9 justices talking about Coach Kennedy and his right to pray. And it was amazing to see such a long battle finally get to the highest court in our land. And so what we're battling against right now in Coach Kennedy's case is whether the free exercise really does protect teachers and coaches and really at this point, any public employee, any government employee. Does the government have the right to cease all religious activity, anything demonstrative? Demonstrative means someone can see it. So that means, are you allowed to pray over your meal? Can you have a cross on? What about someone who wears a hijab? Can they have that on? Is that okay? Because all of that is demonstrative, right? And so if the government says, well, anything demonstrative you can't do, well, that would include all of that stuff I just mentioned. And so Coach Kennedy's case is so incredibly important. And so we expect to get a decision on that case this summer. But those are some of the cases that sort of outline for you the sort of tension between the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And what's really important at this point is that we put all those things in perspective, and people realize that the Establishment Clause doesn't really allow you to just be free from watching someone pray or watching someone be demonstratively religious. It just protects you from the government forcing you to be religious. And so there's a lot of really important questions in all of those cases. And I look forward to telling you about us winning them next time.
So when we talk about the First Amendment, there's a whole bunch of different parts of that. And I want you to elaborate a little bit on Coach Kennedy's case that First Liberty fought all the way to the Supreme Court, because it did open up more religious liberty for Americans than any other case in history, because we got rid of the lemon test. Yeah. So can you explain that a little bit and why we should be restoring faith in America?
Yeah, sure. So Coach Kennedy, football coach in Washington, really inspired by that movie Facing the Giants, and he had a pretty rough upbringing, and so he's very grateful to God for changing his life. So after the games with the boys, he would go and pray on the 50-yard line and thank the Lord, and that happened for a while. And then someone complained, and the school told him he had to stop that. And we wrote a letter. School still pushed back, and so we ended up having to sue. We ended up going, this was in Washington, so this is the Ninth Circuit. So we went District Court, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and then Supreme Court. Supreme Court set us back down to develop some facts. And by the time we got back up to the Supreme Court again, we won. It had been 9 years of us fighting this. So here's the school district's thought process. Well, the students can see you praying, and that's a violation of the separation of church and state. It's a violation of the Establishment Clause. Well, that doesn't make any sense for so many reasons.
Yeah.
You know, the 10 Commandments are hanging in the Supreme Court
Exactly.
right now. You know how many schools and other places have the 10 Commandments? If you pull out your money, what's on that?
In God, we trust.
Right? And what do they say in the Pledge of Allegiance in almost every public school?
Yes.
Okay. So that clearly can't be the case. That clearly can't be right. And it really isn't, right? And so the Supreme Court had to correct these things, because I can tell you it's prevalent throughout the country, where lots and lots of, especially school districts, try to exclude religion and coerce students to stop being religious and to be something almost like anti-religious. And so Coach Kennedy's case was important for a lot of reasons, because there are a lot of government employees in this country. And it taught not only everyone who watched him, but everyone who works in the government and every government, that our Constitution protects people even when they work for the government. You don't own them. They still have their God-given freedoms, and you have to honor those things.
Yes. Well, and I got the first interview with Denise and Coach Kennedy together, his wife,
Wow.
on my stage at my conference last year. It was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. So if you guys haven't seen that, go to our YouTube channel and type in Joe and Denise Kennedy and you'll pull that up. But, you know, I'm really excited about this book because I think there needs to be like common courage. No, uncommon courage. No, but we need like people to break it down for us. Sometimes we
Yes.
think of all this legalese and we're like, we're just an average mom. I don't know why this is important to me. I don't know how it fits into my agenda. But you really break it down, Keisha, in a real simple way for people to understand the importance of the First Amendment, the importance of our liberties. And what do you hope people take away from this when they read your book?
Well, I hope they are inspired to stand up for the truth. I hope they feel confident to do that. And I hope they're inspired by my story too, right? You know, when I became a lawyer, a lot of people ask me, well, how do you go from a teacher to a lawyer? But look at God using both in one book, right? So my ability to break down complex information for people to absorb and understand
So good.
is because God sent me to teach students first,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's really important for me to offer all of this information in a very palatable way and in a way that people can understand and digest very easily. And so that's why I wrote it. I really want it to be useful for people, and I want them to feel inspired and encouraged afterwards and to feel bold and to feel like they can proclaim the truth.
Well, we just so thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for being a part of the Christians Engaged family for so many years on our curriculum. We're recording that again with Kelly Shackelford on it this August, but we are just so blessed by your life, Keisha. Thank you for being faithful, and we live in the same hometown. So,
Yeah.
you know, yay, yay, yay.
Yes, always.
Well, thank you so much, and we'll see everybody next week for another conversation with Christians Engaged. Thank you so much for joining us for this incredible program today. We are so happy to be in your life. Have you shared this? Have you subscribed? Have you reviewed our podcast? Please share this with other people and help us get the word out that Christians are getting empowered around this nation. Step 1 to join Christians Engage is take our pledge to pray, vote, and engage on our website at christiansengage.org. Every week, we'll teach you how to pray for government. We will send voting reminders around every election, and we'll help you engage more for America. Step 2, take one of our classes. Have you taken our On-Ramp to Civic Engagement or Biblical Worldview or the Leadership of Nehemiah or Biblical Conduct? We have so many classes, including a full campaign school that you can plug into right now on our classes page. Step 3, hey, it's time to get involved in campaigns, advocacy, registering more Christian voters, activating your church. Every Christian needs to get off the sidelines and make a difference. We are here to mentor you into your place of leadership. That's what we do every day at Christians Engage. So reach out to us for help in any of those areas. And lastly, everybody listening to me right now can help fund a movement of millions of Christians that will pray, vote, and engage ongoing. We're supported by people just like you that every month or every year invest in this ministry, their hard-earned dollars, their treasure, their heart. We thank you so much. Please be a part and give at christiansengage.org. Thank you so much to our partners at The Stream. Thanks for sharing this podcast every week. We so appreciate you. Also, Edify app with Christian Post. Thank you for having us part of your podcast ministries. Christians Engage is a ministry of Family Policy Alliance Foundation, and together around the country, we are mobilizing Christians to pray, vote, and engage. We love you. We'll see you back next week.